Welcome to the Deep Chapter. What happens when a people lose their homeland? In Chapter 2, we're unraveling 1600 years of exile and empires that shaped the Israel-Palestine story, from Rome's crushing blow to the rise of Christian and Muslim powers in Palestine. From Jerusalem's fall to new faiths rising, this is where the past sets the stage for today's conflict. Let's deep dive into this history to uncover why this land remains so sacred. Let's journey through time together.
The Roman exile. A people scattered 135 CE to 324 CE. It's 132 CE in Judea. The ancient heartland of the Jewish people ignites in rebellion once more, led by Simon Bar Kokhba. Jews rise against Roman tyranny, dreaming of independence. But by 135 CE, Emperor Hadrian's forces crushed the revolt, razing Jerusalem, renaming it Aelia Capitolina, and banning Jews from their holy city. Thousands perish, enslaved or scattered across the Roman Empire to North Africa, Europe, Mesopotamia, and beyond. This marks the deepening of the Jewish diaspora, a time of exile from 135 to 324 CE, centered in Judea but rippling outward. While a remnant clings to Galilee, Jewish life shifts to distant communities, preserving faith amid loss. This is the story of devastation, survival, and the unyielding spirit that carried Judaism through centuries of dispersion. The Bar Kokhba Revolt. Sparks of rebellion. Why did it happen? The Bar Kokhba Revolt, erupting in 132 CE, stemmed from decades of Roman oppression. Heavy taxes, religious restrictions, and Emperor Hadrian's plans to rebuild. Jerusalem is Aelia Capitolina, pagan colony dedicated to Jupiter. On the ruins of the Second Temple ignited fury. Jews, haunted by the first revolt's destruction in 70 CE, saw this as an existential threat to their faith and identity. Driven by messianic hopes and a history of resistance, they fought for autonomy. Rome, viewing Judea as a perpetual thorn in its empire, sought to eradicate the rebellion's roots. Simon Bar Kokhba, a charismatic leader, hailed as a messiah by Rabbi Akiva, united disparate Jewish factions. His name meaning son of the star. Reference to prophecy in Numbers 24:17. A star shall come out of Jacob. Bar Kokhba's forces began with guerrilla attacks, seizing villages and briefly controlling Jerusalem, minting coins inscribed with freedom of Israel and temple imagery. For 3 years they held swaths of Judea, establishing a short-lived independent state. Archaeological evidence, like Bar Kokhba's letters found in the Cave of Letters near the Dead Sea, reveals his strategic commands. From Shimon Bar Kokhba to the men of En-Gedi, send wood and citron for the festival. These papyrus documents, discovered in the 1960s, show organized resistance and adherence to Jewish rituals amid war. Key players included Hadrian, whose policies fueled the fire, Bar Kokhba, the rebel messiah, and resilient Jewish communities, from fighters to civilians preserving Torah scrolls in secret. Rome's crushing response and the fall of Betar. How did it unfold? The revolt spread rapidly, with Jews capturing Roman garrisons and establishing control over Judea. But Rome responded with overwhelming force, deploying up to 12 legions, nearly a third of its army under Hadrian's commander. By 134 CE, General Sextus Julius Severus arrived from Britain, employing siege tactics to starve out rebel strongholds. The decisive blow fell at Betar in 135 CE, Bar Kokhba's last fortress southwest of Jerusalem. Roman historian Cassius Dio records 580,000 Jews were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number who perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Though numbers may be exaggerated, archaeology confirms the carnage. Excavations at Betar reveal mass graves and destroyed fortifications. Bar Kokhba perished in the siege, his death shattering messianic dreams. Survivors hid in elaborate underground complexes, like those recently uncovered in the Galilee, with tunnels, storage rooms, and ritual baths, evidencing desperate survival. Thousands were enslaved, sold in Roman markets, or executed. Hadrian sought to erase Jewish identity. Judea was renamed Syria Palestina after the ancient Philistines. and Jews were forbidden from entering Aelia Capitolina except on Tisha B'Av to mourn. This brutal suppression marked the end of large-scale Jewish resistance in Judea for centuries, accelerating the diaspora. The deepening diaspora. Life in exile. The aftermath scattered Jews far and wide. From 135 to 324 CE, the diaspora expanded, with survivors fleeing to establish communities in Mesopotamia, Babylon, Egypt, Alexandria, North Africa, Carthage, Asia Minor, and Europe, Italy, Spain. A small remnant persisted in Galilee, where rabbis like Judah, the prince, compiled the Mishnah around 200 CE, codifying oral law to preserve Judaism without a temple. In exile, Jewish life adapted. Synagogues became centers of worship and study, replacing the destroyed temple. Communities thrived in trade, agriculture, and scholarship. Babylonian academies produced the Talmud, while Alexandrian Jews engaged Greek philosophy. Yet challenges abounded. Roman edicts marginalized Jews, imposing special taxes like the Fiscus Judaicus. Persecutions flared, especially under emperors like Septimius Severus. Genetic studies show continuity between ancient Judeans and diaspora Jews, underscoring enduring ties to the land. By 324 CE, with Constantine's rise and Christianity's ascent, Jewish communities navigated a shifting empire, their exile a blend of loss and adaptation. In these scattered havens, Jews carried their faith, texts, and hope, forging resilience amid displacement. Contexts, perspectives, and emotional echoes. Historical perspectives vary. Western scholars like Edward Gibbon viewed the revolt as a doomed fanatic stand against Rome's might, emphasizing Jewish zeal leading to catastrophe. Revisionists like Shlomo Sand questioned the exile's scale, suggesting many Jews remained in Palestine, converting or blending with locals. Eastern chroniclers in early Islamic texts note Palestine's transformation into a Roman Byzantine province with Jews as a minority. Modern interpretations see it as a defining trauma, cementing Jewish identity through dispersion, or a mythologized narrative reinforcing ties to the land. Cause and effect. The revolt's failure depopulated Judea, paving the way for Christian dominance under Constantine in 324 CE and later Muslim rule. The diaspora fostered global Jewish networks, but diminished presence in Palestine. Emotionally, imagine the anguish losing Jerusalem, the heart of faith, banned from return. Yet in exile, Jews clung to prayers like "Next year in Jerusalem," a testament to endurance and hope. This scattering sowed seeds of survival, where faith became portable, unbound by land. Archaeological and historical insights. Archaeology illuminates the era. The Cave of Letters yielded Bar Kokhba's missives and artifacts like a woman's bundle of deeds, showing daily life amid revolt. Hiding complexes in Hukok and Lod reveal tunnels used for escape, with coins dated to year 3 of the redemption of Israel. Batar's siege works and mass graves confirm Dio's accounts of devastation. In Galilee, synagogues, like those at Capernaum, with inscriptions from the 3rd century, show persistent Jewish life. Historical sources, Cassius, Dio, Eusebius, and rabbinic texts, like the Talmud, offer biased but vital records. Genetic analyses link modern Jews to ancient Judeans, affirming continuity. Science Direct 2020. These finds weave a narrative of rebellion, ruin, and rebirth in exile. Together they ground the story of a people scattered yet unbroken. From the Bar Kokhba revolt's ashes in 135 CE to Constantine's era in 324 CE, the Roman exile scattered the Jewish people, deepening the diaspora. Hadrian's erasure failed. Judaism adapted, thriving in distant lands while a remnant held Galilee. This period of loss forged unbreakable resilience, carrying the covenant through exile into history's next chapters. Byzantine Palestine, a Christian crossroads, 324 to 638 CE. It is the year 324 CE. The empire once rooted in Rome has a new capital, Constantinople, and a new faith at its heart. Emperor Constantine, now sole ruler, has embraced Christianity and decreed peace for the Church Palestine. The land of prophets and the life of Jesus awakens like never before. What was once a remote Roman backwater becomes, as scholar Jody McNeese notes, one of the most important provinces in the Roman world. Almost overnight, thousands of pilgrims sweep into its towns and deserts, and hundreds of churches, monasteries, and hostels were built around the country to serve them. The Christianization of Palestine under Constantine in 313 CE. Constantine and Licinius had ended the empire's persecution of Christians. A decade later, the land itself begins to change. Emperor Constantine orders the excavation of ancient sites and the construction of holy shrines. His mother, Empress Helena, now on pilgrimage, personally sponsors churches over the very places of Jesus' birth, life, and resurrection at Bethlehem. Humble barns and caves give way to the Church of the Nativity. Dedicated in 339 CE, it is one of only 3 churches in Palestine built by Constantine himself underground. A grotto is venerated as Christ's birthplace, encircled by an octagonal shrine gilded in mosaic tile. Far to the north in Nazareth, tradition holds the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary. Their early Christians erect a modest chapel, later rebuilt on a grand scale. Across the valleys of Galilee, new churches spring up near the modest synagogues of Capernaum and Tabgha, symbolizing the dawn of a Christian era. Indeed, as one historian observes, Byzantine patronage encouraged waves of Christian settlers into Palestine. Eventually, Galilee lost its Jewish majority. As churches went up across its towns now, the cradle of Christianity glows with newfound splendor. Constantine himself builds Jerusalem's greatest church, the Holy Sepulchre, over Golgotha and the tomb of Christ. The church will be dedicated a decade later, in 335 CE. In its ceremony, all the Eastern bishops gather to anoint emperors and sanctify relics. By 325 CE, Jerusalem is not a forgotten province, but the center of the Christian world. Less than a century earlier, it was leveled. Now Constantine's vision and Helena's pilgrimage have restored its place at the heart of faith, building the shrines. Church of the Holy Sepulchre and beyond. The frenzy of construction continues. In Jerusalem, after Constantine's order in 326 CE, workmen unearthed the sealed tomb of Christ. Helena is said to have found fragments of the true cross in those excavations. Over the sacred site and nearby Calvary, architects build the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a grand rotunda with a dome and an adjoining Basilica. Bethlehem's Church of the Nativity is no afterthought. Constantine shapes its plan with subtle symbolism. An octagon stands over the humble cave that tradition marks as Jesus' birthplace inside. Votive candles shimmer on stone. These sanctuaries, Holy Sepulchre, Nativity, and others. Priests and pilgrims alike sense the ancient world and the new. Even Nazareth and Galilee feel the change. Though no Byzantine emperor found a tomb or cave here, local Christians build modest shrines where Jesus taught and lived. Village churches adopt the new Christian art, frescoes of Christ and apostles blending classical style with local tradition under Constantine's reign. Palestine's stone-scarred landscapes begin to shine again with crosses and domes. As faith reshapes the very skyline, Jewish life in Galilee and exclusion from Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the Jews of Palestine find a new reality. Centuries after the destruction of the temple, Jews remain scattered in the countryside, mostly in Galilee and the Golan, but rarely in Jerusalem itself. When Constantine resurrected the city as Christianity's beacon, Jewish hopes for returning to Jerusalem dwindled. By the mid-4th century, Jerusalem and Judea have become predominantly Christian lands in Galilee. However, Jewish life endures. Tiberias, Sepphoris, and other towns bustle with Jewish families, sages, and merchants. It is here the final chapters of ancient Judaism are written. In fact, the Jerusalem Talmud is compiled by rabbis of Galilee in the early 400s. The Jewish Sanhedrin, central court, sits in Tiberias until 425 CE yet. The imperial laws are clear. Jerusalem is the city of Christ. Under Theodosius and then Justinian, new decrees bar Jews from court offices and tighten restriction. In 362 to 364 CE, the pagan Julian even promises to rebuild the Jewish temple, but his reign is too short to matter. By the time of Justinian in the 6th century, Jewish institutions in Palestine are effectively shut down. Many Jews who had hoped to return have instead built lives in Galilee or abroad. Still, Jewish culture perseveres away from Jerusalem's marble churches, In Galilee's hills, families celebrate Passover in local synagogues. Farms harvest olives as their ancestors did. And rabbis teach Torah under the open sky. Christian and Jewish communities live a breath apart. Sometimes neighbors, sometimes rivals, but both rooted in this ancient soil. Palestinian Christian communities and identity by the 5th century. Christianity in Palestine is no monolith, but a tapestry of local beliefs. Churches grow strong in every town, Greek-speaking Chalcedonian congregations in Arabic, Syriac-speaking monophysites, monastic communities in deserts and city, the new aristocracy of bishops. Jerusalem itself is raised to the rank of patriarchate at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE, joining the great sees of Rome. Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch. Local tradition flourishes. Scholars note that as Christians settled throughout the land, they began to develop a distinctive Palestinian devotion. Pilgrims record unique rites in the Holy City. Monks like Saint Euthemius, Saint Sabas, later Saint John of Damascus, cultivate desert monasteries that draw disciples from afar. Bishop Cyril, later called Cyril of Jerusalem, instructs catechumens in the 350s, establishing liturgical practices remembered for centuries. Lady patrons also play a part. Empress Eudocia, once banished from Byzantium, makes Jerusalem her home around 443 CE, pouring treasure into rebuilding its walls and shrines. Pilgrim guidebooks mention new fountains, expanded hostels, and commissioned Bibles, all stamped with a Palestinian imprint. By Justinian's time, 527 to 565 CE, Palestine reaches its apogee. Theological schools in Caesarea and Jerusalem thrive. Pilgrim traffic from the West peaks, and church art achieves a golden age through this vibrant Christian era. A sense of Palestinian Christian identity is born, one tied to the living memory of Jesus' footsteps on these stones, yet under the authority of emperors 1,000 miles away. The Sassanid Persian conquest of 614 CE and aftermath. But in the early 7th century, trouble erupts again. Decades of war and plague have weakened Byzantium. In 614 CE, an army of the Sassanid Persians, allied with some disaffected Jews and local Semites, sweeps down from Syria. Without prolonged siege, Jerusalem falls. Byzantine and Christian sources speak of gates thrown open and multitudes slaughtered. The accounts are harrowing. Chroniclers like Sebios record thousands of Jerusalem's faithful killed or enslaved on Persian general. Antiochus Strategos boasts tens of thousands of victims, including clergy and even the patriarch Zacharias, carried away in chains. Crucially, the invaders find the relic Christians prize most, the fragment of Christ's cross. It is seized and sent back to Ctesiphon. The Sassanid capital survivors speak of churches ransacked and gardens trampled. The holy sites of Bethlehem and Nazareth suffered too. Pilgrims flee south toward Egypt and Ethiopia. For a while, the Persians hand rule of Jerusalem to a Jewish vassal, hoping to rebuild the temple. But local Christians and some Jews revolt against this fragile regime. After bloody infighting, the Persians retake control, and the city lies under foreign rule for over a decade. Out of this crisis, the Byzantines strike back. By 622, Emperor Heraclius mounts a grand counteroffensive into Sassanid heartlands. His victory at Nineveh in 627 is mythic, leading to peace in 628. In triumph, Heraclius brings the true cross home. On March 21st, 630 CE, or possibly 629, he enters Jerusalem amid jubilant crowds, hoisting the restored relic high for the Orthodox. This is a moment of epiphany. The cross returned to its rightful city. Yet the jubilation masks deeper wounds. Palestine is exhausted, its cities rebuilding, its people tired. In the following years, the region is governed once more from Constantinople, but with eyes turned to other threats. The great church rises from its ashes, but the populace is hollowed by war and pestilence. Byzantine recovery, in the eve of Islamic conquest in the years after 630, Byzantine rule in Palestine limps back to life. Some buildings are restored, bishops resume liturgies, but the empire's finances and forces are critically depleted. Tensions fester. Monophysite Christians who lost at Chalcedon feel alienated. Jews have no civil hierarchy, and even the local Christian population senses a stroke of destiny elsewhere. By 639 CE, a new power looms over the southern desert. Muslim forces under Caliph Umar have swept through Arabia and Syria. Hearing of Jerusalem's fracturing state, they cross the Jordan. 606 to 637, they defeat the Byzantine army at Yarmouk and approach Jerusalem's walls. When the city finally surrenders in 638, the era of Byzantine Palestine quietly ends. In less than 300 years, this land has seen the faith of Constantine's empire flourish and then be eclipsed. But the legacy of those centuries remains indelible. The cities, roads, and faith of Palestine have been forever reshaped. The Islamic conquest and rule of Palestine, 638 to 1099 CE in the mid-7th century. The lands of Palestine stood at a crossroads of empires. The Byzantine Empire, long weakened by wars with Persia, still governed ancient cities like Jerusalem. But a new force, the armies of the young Islamic Caliphate, surged northward. Desert warriors under the banner of Islam struck like lightning in 636 CE, crushing Byzantine forces at the Battle of Yarmouk. Within 2 years, only Jerusalem and Caesarea clung to Byzantine rule. Under siege from the south, Jerusalem finally capitulated. Patriarch Sophronius agreed to surrender, but only to the Caliph himself. So, in 638 CE, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab arrived humbly on a donkey to accept the city's keys. The city he entered, known to Muslims as Al-Quds, would soon be remade as part of the Islamic world. Conquest and early rule under Caliph Umar, the terms of surrender were laid down with extraordinary tolerance. Umar granted Christians the status of dhimmis, protected subjects. Under Islam, the text of the Treaty of Umar pledged safety. He has given them an assurance of safety for their churches, their crosses, the sick and healthy, their property, all the rituals which belong to their religion. He forbade Muslims from using the holy sites of Christianity, even promising that their churches will not be inhabited by Muslims and will not be destroyed. In exchange, the people of Jerusalem would simply pay the standard taxes. This pact, one of the first guarantees of religious freedom in history, became the benchmark for Muslim-Christian relations in the decades to come. A clause barring Jews from the city appears in some accounts, but historians note it is likely a later addition with the treaty sealed. Umar immediately shaped the new order. He recognized Jerusalem's exalted place in Islam. It had been the first Qibla direction of prayer for Muslims, and the Prophet Muhammad's legendary night journey bound it to Islamic faith. Climbing the rubble of the neglected Temple Mount, soon called Al-Karam, Al-Sharf, the noble sanctuary, Umar found trash and brush. He and his followers cleared the debris with their own hands. Declaring the whole platform a sacred mosque precinct in that spot, they erected the first Masjid al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque, an assembly hall for prayer. Thus, Jerusalem became Islam's third holiest city. Meanwhile, the Caliph reorganized the land itself. He divided Palestine into 2 military districts, Ejnad, just as the Romans had, Jundalard and Jordan to the north, and Jun Falastin to the south. Galilee and Acre went to the Jordan district. The rest of Palestine, from Ramlah down to Gaza, formed Falastin, with its capital first at Lydda, modern Lod, and later at a new city, Ramlah. Established in 716 CE, the era of Muslim rule was born. Merchants and pilgrims would soon traverse these roads under the crescent banner, and Jerusalem's skyline would begin to feature the slender minarets of new mosques among its ancient stones. The Umayyad Caliphate and the Dome of the Rock, half a century after Umar, power passed to the Umayyad dynasty, based in Damascus. Palestine became one of the empire's prized provinces. The Umayyad caliphs lavished attention on Jerusalem's sanctity. In 691 CE, Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan commissioned a masterpiece, the Dome of the Rock. This shimmering octagonal shrine, with its gilded dome and intricate mosaics, round the very rock of Solomon's temple, the spot from which Muhammad was believed to have ascended to heaven. Its walls bore Quranic inscriptions, affirming Islam's claim. As historians note, the Dome of the Rock stands today as the oldest surviving Islamic monument, a testament to the Umayyads' religious vision and ambition. Not far away, Caliph Al-Walid, a son of Abdi al-Malik, transformed Umar's humble prayer hall into a grand Jami Aleku, congregational mosque by 705 CE. He rebuilt it on a much larger scale, with 15 aisles and a central dome, its columns and mosaics reflecting both Byzantine influence and new Islamic art. The two landmarks, the dome and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, anchored Jerusalem under Muslim rule. In the 8th century, the city drew pilgrims and scholars. Markets thrived, and papyri and coins circulated as Arabic replaced Greek on the tongue of officials. The process of Arabization took hold quickly, even if the Islamization of the heart was more gradual. Meanwhile, the rest of Palestine prospered. The new city of Ramla, near the coastal plain, grew rich on trade. Farms irrigated by the canal from the Yarkun River fed Damascus and Medina, yet Umayyad rule was not unchallenged. The tribe of Yemen, supporters of the Umayyads, and the tribes of Qays, who backed their rivals, clashed from Syria to Palestine. In 717 CE, the Umayyad Caliph Umar II, no relation to Umar, I imposed stricter taxes and rules on Christians and Jews to encourage conversion. The result: Arabic and Islam spread. By the early 8th century, contemporary chronicles note, conversions arising from convenience as well as conviction changed the religious character of Palestine. The predominantly Christian population gradually became predominantly Muslim and Arabic-speaking, though villages of each faith remained throughout the countryside. Even a small Jewish community quietly reappeared in Galilee. After centuries of banishment, and a few families made their way back to Jerusalem, at the Western Wall and Temple Mount. When the Muslim conquerors allowed it Abbasid rule and cultural shifts, narrator voiceover in 750 CE. The Abbasid revolution swept aside the Umayyads. Palestine, like Syria, now answered to the Caliph in Baghdad. At first, the transition seemed smooth. Officials in Ramla kept records, taxes flowed to the new Caliph, and trade with the Abbasid capital continued. But Abbasid power was Baghdad's power. Far to the east, Abbasids favored different tribes than the Umayyads had. Discontent grew. Yemeni partisans rose in rebellion among Palestinian peasants, hoping to restore an Umayyad prince. In 841 to 842, tribal leader Abu Harb flew the old Umayyad banner. For a brief moment, many villagers hailed him as savior against the hated Abbasids. The revolt was crushed, but it left a mark on the land. Over the following centuries, Abbasid authority ebbed. Caliphs still sent envoys and pilgrims to Jerusalem. But as the 800s turned into the 900s, the province felt remote from Baghdad. Meanwhile, neighboring powers encroached. In 868 CE, Egypt's Tulunids broke away, ruling Syria and Palestine in name of Abbasids, but in practice independent. Then came shockwaves. In 903, fanatical Sarmatians from eastern Arabia raided the Levant. They overran towns, threatened the pilgrimage routes, and for a time even seized Damascus. In Jerusalem, they looted mosques and took prisoners. Although Abbasid armies eventually expelled the Sarmatians, their raids sowed fear in the cities. The Abbasids, weakened at home, soon turned control of Palestine over to local dynasties. The Exudids of Egypt held sway from 935 until 969, maintaining order but sometimes skirmishing with Turkey-ruled Byzantines to the north. Finally, in 969 CE, a new dynasty arrived from Africa. The Fatimid Caliphate, a Shia house based in Cairo, conquered Egypt and then Palestine. Under the Fatimids, Jerusalem's fortunes wavered. Caliph al-Hakim Omar, Allah took an extreme turn. In 1009, he ordered the Church of the Holy Sepulchre burned to the ground, enraging the Christian world. The Mosque of Al-Aqsa itself fell to an earthquake in 1033 and had to be rebuilt by 1045. Through it all, Muslim governors ruled with coreligionists in power until 1073, when Seljuk Turks became overlords. Yet even under these changing rulers, some things remained constant. Jerusalem's great mosques stood. Christian bishops still served inside the city. Farmers tilled wheat fields as they had for millennia. The Abbasid era saw Islam and Arab culture deepen their roots in Palestine. By the 10th century, Arabic was the language of courts and city bazaars in the refugee camps of Jordan and Upper Egypt. Many Palestinian exiles continued the Arabic dialect of their homeland, evidence of this long process. Society and demography. Arabization and DMI communities over these centuries. The fabric of society wove together new and old threads. The conquerors allowed Jews and Christians to continue their faiths as people of the book. Under Islamic law, they paid a special tax jizya, but in return were guaranteed security. Christian liturgy remained in Syriac and Greek, and rabbis taught Torah, even as mosques claimed the skyline. The famed tombs of the prophets in the patriarchal monasteries still stood. In villages around Galilee and the Judean hills, peasants of all faiths tended vineyards and olive groves side by side. A traveler of the 9th century noted that churches were never forcibly converted or occupied. Instead, they coexisted alongside mosques. Arabization of culture happened swiftly. Arabic became the common tongue in markets and courts. Most inhabitants adopted Arabic names by the 9th century. Islamization, by contrast, unfolded more slowly. Many families converted to Islam over generations, some drawn by the desire to avoid taxes, others by genuine conviction. The Umayyad Caliph Umar II, 717 to 720, had formally banned new church construction and imposed stricter rules on dhimmis, which spurred conversions. By the 800s, as one chronicle observes, the predominantly Christian population gradually became predominantly Muslim and Arabic-speaking. The Jewish community, long persecuted under Byzantium, found a new chance in Muslim Palestine. Jews were once forbidden in Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now under Islamic rule, a few returned. They built synagogues in Galilean towns and even came to pray at the Western Wall. A clause in Umar's covenant mentions expelling Jews from Jerusalem, but it was never strictly enforced. On the contrary, Jews served in Muslim councils and lived under the Sultan's protection. Christians generally fared well, though their churches periodically suffered under fanatic rulers like Al-Hakim. Overall, the centuries 638–1099 saw a plural society. Arabic culture pervaded daily life, but the mosaic of faiths endured. In churches, the Eucharist was recited in Coptic or Greek. In synagogues, Aramaic was still heard. The Crusader chronicler William of Tyre noted in later years that Palestinians spoke Arabic in their homes, but kept Christian customs in their hearts, a testament to the blended heritage of the era. From 638 CE's humble mosque at Jerusalem's gate to the bustling cities of Ramla, Nablus, and Acre, the Islamic centuries left an indelible mark on the land. For 462 years, the land was ruled by Muslim caliphs: Umayyad, Abbasid, Tulunid, Iqshidid, and Fatimid. Yet religious minorities remained under the covenant of Umar. They paid tribute but kept their scriptures and sanctuaries. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, built in those early centuries, still define Jerusalem's skyline. Archaeology assures us that beneath their stones lie the stories of ancient Israel, Byzantium, and the desert caliphs alike. Even now, as flags of three religions flutter over the city walls, many see in this era a foundation for Palestine's complex identity. As one historian notes, the Muslim conquest was an important moment in the city's history, but it also preserved Jerusalem's mosaic of peoples in the end. The words inscribed above Umar's mosque, Allahu Akbar, God is greatest, may differ from the Latin chants once sung in those streets. But the city's weight in history and faith endures. The Islamic period in Palestine sowed seeds of cultural richness and conflict that would bloom in the Crusades and beyond. Out of the dust and ruins of empires, one lesson remains: the resilience of a land sacred to many. The Crusader kingdom in the Holy Land, 1099 to 1291 CE. It is July 1099. After 3 years of arduous marching from Europe, a ragged army of knights and pilgrims stands before Jerusalem's golden walls. Their eyes rest on the Templum Domini, the dome of the rock, gilded by the rising sun. Below them, the narrow Kidron Valley is stifled in smoke from campfires and siege engines. Godfrey of Bouillon, a Frankish count with a cross on his cloak, leads the vanguard up towering wooden ramps. As dawn breaks on July 15th, the Crusaders breach the northern wall. First, men slip through the gate of St. Stephen, then hundreds follow. Chaos erupts. The defenders break and flee, but the victors give no quarter. According to medieval chroniclers, they spare none. With drawn swords, our men ran through the city, not sparing anyone. Chaplin later writes, Muslims and Jews alike fall victim to the sword smoke, and the cries of war fill the air as Jerusalem, the holy city, is conquered. Thus began the Crusader kingdom in Palestine. In that brutal summer of 1099, the First Crusade completed its mission. Jerusalem was seized. The Caliphate weakened, and Western knights held the ancient city for Christendom. In the aftermath, the Crusaders carved out new realms. The most important became the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, ruled first by Godfrey and then his brother King Baldwin I. In quick succession, they secured the Mediterranean coast. By 1104, Baldwin had taken Haifa and Acre, by 1110 Beirut and Sidon, and by 1124 Tyre fell into Crusader hands. Castles and towns from Caesarea, in the north down to the Dead Sea, were stitched together into a fragile Christian state. These Crusader states, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa, were Western fiefs ruled by Frankish nobles. For nearly 2 centuries, waves of armies would arrive from Europe to defend or retake the Holy Land. At its height, the Latin kingdom sprawled over present-day Israel, southern Lebanon, and western Jordan. As Crusaders set palaces in Jerusalem and fortresses from the Jordan River to the coast, but this patchwork of outposts was always under assault. By 1187, the great Muslim leader Saladin shattered the Crusader armies at Hattin and took back Jerusalem. In 1291, the last stronghold, the port city of Acre, was lost in a final massacre when Acre fell in May 1291. The dream of a Christian kingdom in the Holy Land was extinguished, leaving only stone ruins and shattered hopes in its wake. When and where? The saga of the Crusaders unfolds along the eastern Mediterranean coast in inland valleys. It begins in 1099, when armies converged on Jerusalem, the city held since 1009 by the Shia Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt. After Jerusalem's capture, the Crusaders spread north and east, using coastal roads. By the mid-12th century, the Kingdom of Jerusalem controlled the key ports and cities from the Lebanese border to Gaza. Caesarea captured 1101, Acre 1104, Haifa 1104, Beirut 1110, Sidon 1110, and Tyre 1124 came under Frankish rule inland. They held Jaffa, Ramla, Hebron, and at times as far east as the Jordan Rift. On the opposite timeline, the Muslim world was initially fragmented. Seljuk Turkish emirs, Arab princes, and the Fatimids struggled for power. By the late 12th century, Saladin, a Kurdish sultan of Egypt and Syria, unified the Muslim front. He annihilated the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin on July 4, 1187, and took Jerusalem. That September, Europe answered with the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart arrived at Acre in June 1191, and after a bitter siege, took the city on July 12. Over the next century, the map shrank. In 1229, Emperor Frederick II briefly recovered Jerusalem by treaty, but it reverted to Muslim hands less than 10 years later. The remaining Frankish domains dwindled to a few coastal citadels. Baybars, the Mamluk Sultan, ruled 1260 to 1277, took Caesarea and Arsuf, Antioch in 1268, while Khalil Baybars' successor besieged Tripoli, fallen 1289. At last, Acre itself fell in 1291. Thus, the story runs along the coast of the Levant and through Jerusalem, from 1099's hard-won victory to 1291's final defeat. A closed book on Crusader dominion in Palestine. Asterisk, who were the key players? This was an age of larger-than-life figures. On the Christian side, Godfrey of Bouillon, a pious knight who refused the crown of Jerusalem, calling himself only advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. His brother Baldwin, who became the first king of Jerusalem. Bohemond of Taranto, the bold Norman conqueror of Antioch. Raymond of Toulouse, a French count turned Crusader prince. Tancred, a Norman knight who jumped through the breach into Jerusalem in 1099. The armies themselves were led by European nobility, an army of about 4,000 knights, and 25,000 foot soldiers from France and the Holy Roman Empire. Under counts like Raymond and Godfrey, many were supported by new military orders, the Knights Hospital and Templars. Warrior monks, who would fortify castles and hospitals across the kingdom. By 1291, the Hospitallers held Acre. Their Grand Master, as the century closed, fought to the last at the city walls. This was an age of larger-than-life figures. On the Christian side, Godfrey of Bouillon, a pious knight who refused the crown of Jerusalem, calling himself only advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. His brother Baldwin, who became the first king of Jerusalem. Bohemond of Taranto, the bold Norman conqueror of Antioch. Raymond of Toulouse, a French count turned Crusader prince. And Tancred, a Norman knight who jumped through the breach into Jerusalem in 1099. The armies themselves were led by European nobility. An army of about 4,000 knights and 25,000 foot soldiers from France and the Holy Roman Empire. Under counts like Raymond and Godfrey, many were supported by new military orders. The Knights Hospitaller and Templars, warrior monks who would fortify castles and hospitals across the kingdom. By 1291, the Hospitallers held Acre. Their Grand Master, as the century closed, fought to the last at the city walls. Why did it happen? I understand the Crusades is to understand devotion and desperation. By the late 11th century, Christians could no longer freely visit Jerusalem, report some exaggerated spread of pilgrim attacks and desecrated churches. In 1095, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I asked the Pope for troops to help against the Seljuk Turks. At Clermont that year, Pope Urban II answered the call. He proclaimed a holy war to save the Christian East from Islam, promising remission of sins to those who took up the cross. The speech stirred souls, knights, peasants, even children, to vow to liberate the Holy Sepulchre. Beyond piety, others saw opportunity. Western lords had little land in those years of shortage, so the Levant offered fiefs and fortune. Trade ambitions also played a part. Italian city-states expected new markets if they could secure eastern ports. In Muslim lands, by contrast, internal divisions between Seljuk princes, Fatimid, caliphs, and later Ayyubids meant no unified defense until Saladin. Thus, a unique moment arrived. A PayPal call met a fragmented world. The fervor of religion fused with feudal ambition, precipitating the First Crusade. Over the next 2 centuries, later calls, for example, Gregory VIII's bull in 1187 aimed to answer urgent crises like the fall of Jerusalem. But by then, the reasons had become complex. Chivalric ideals, dynastic rivalry in Europe, and even promises of land or treasure motivated men to cross deserts again and again. At its heart, however, the Crusader enterprise was framed as a penitential pilgrimage with the sword, an idea planted by the medieval church in 1095 and cultivated for generations. How did it unfold? The drama unfolded in epic campaigns, sieges, and chivalric duels. After Jerusalem's fall in 1099, the new kingdom secured the coast and repelled Fatimid and Turkish counterattacks. In 1144, the distant county of Edessa fell to the Turks, sparking the ill-fated Second Crusade 1147–49, a venture that ultimately failed to save Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Jerusalem's kings built powerful castles, Karak, Beaver, and hosted pilgrim caravans, enjoying decades of uneasy peace. That peace shattered in 1187. Saladin's forces encircled the Crusader army at the Horns of Hattin. Overcome by thirst and sword, the Franks were annihilated. Within months, Saladin swept the coast, Acre, Jaffa, and on September 2nd, 1187, Jerusalem itself capitulated under generous terms. Word of this catastrophe swept through Europe. Pope Gregory's calls brought forth the Third Crusade. In 1189, 3 crowned monarchs set out: Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, who drowned en route, King Philip II of France, and England's Richard the Lionheart. Richard arrived in the spring of 1191 to relieve the long blockade of Acre. By the 12th of July, 1191, after relentless bombardment and plague in camp, the city finally fell. The victors included Richard's famous crossbow knights and the master of the Hospitallers. Following Acre's fall, Richard marched south to Jaffa. On September 7th, he decisively routed Saladin's army at Arsif, opening a path toward Jerusalem. In the decades that followed, smaller crusading efforts ebbed and flowed. Frederick II recaptured Jerusalem by diplomacy in 1229, only to lose it soon after. European kings like Louis IX of France diverted to Egypt the Fifth and Seventh Crusades, but met only defeat. Meanwhile, Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty gave way to the Mamluks. In the 1260s, Sultan Baybars systematically captured Frankish outposts, Caesarea, Arsif, Antioch. And by 1285 only Tripoli, Tyre, and Acre remained. In May 1291, Sultan Khalil laid siege to Acre with a vast army. He even dragged the great Trebuchet victorious from the hilltop Crac des Chevaliers for the assault. Despite desperate sallies by Hospitaller knights firing their own catapults, the Mamluks broke through. The Crusaders fell back to the harbor. Many drowned or were killed ashore. For 10 days, the Templars and Hospitallers held a hill fortress, but with walls crumbling, even they were swept aside. By May 18th, the city was lost and a final Latin garrison slaughtered. Kar's destruction was thorough. Khalil ordered the city leveled its stones to build his mosque in Cairo. Thus ended the saga. The last European stronghold in Palestine was gone, and with it, the dream of a permanent Christian rule in the Holy Land. Asterisk. The dust has long since settled over the plains of Palestine. Armies have come and gone. Ottomans, British, modern nations. But the Crusaders' footprints remain faintly visible. Stones that once rang with the clang of swords now hold moss and memory. Among them, we find crosses carved on lintels, coins stamped with the faces of French kings, and the ghostly outline of ruined halls where knights once feasted. In a garden in Acre, a child plays beside an aged olive tree said to have grown since Crusader days. On Temple Mount stones, tourists pause beneath the golden dome, unaware of the Crusader church that once stood there. Back in Europe, in the grand churches funded by Crusade tides, stained glass glows of scenes long past. Each archaeological dig, from Jerusalem citadel to Apollonius cliffs, brings a whisper of that era to light. We close our chronicle with that image. A humble jar of gold coins, dug from soil in 2012, clasped by an archaeologist's gloved hand. These silent relics speak more loudly than pages of history. Once, a family hid them in terror. Now, we hold them at peace. The Crusades in the Holy Land are over, their warriors buried and castles fallen. Yet the story endures, written in stone, in coin, in landscape, and in the collective memory of civilizations. The year is 1291 no longer, but in the amber light of antiquity, the past lives on. Asterisk. Ottoman Palestine, a quiet prelude. It's 1517 CE, and the land known as Palestine, once a crossroads of empires, falls under Ottoman rule. Conquered by Sultan Selim, the first from the Mamluks, this province becomes a stable but underdeveloped corner of a vast empire stretching from Europe to Arabia. For nearly 3 centuries, until 1800, Palestine experiences relative peace, with Arab Muslims dominating daily life as farmers. And merchants, while small Jewish communities grow in holy cities, fueled by spiritual migrations and diaspora support. No grand wars ravaged the land, but subtle tensions, Simmerland disputes with Bedouins, economic stagnation, and cultural diversity under distant sultans. This is the story of quiet endurance, administrative efficiency, and the seeds of future conflicts in a forgotten prelude to modern turmoil. The Ottoman conquest and early administration. In January 1517, Sultan Selim I, known as the Grim, decisively defeated the Mamluk Sultanate at Radanya near Cairo, incorporating Syria and Palestine into the Ottoman fold without major resistance in the Holy Land itself. This conquest ended 250 years of Mamluk rule and brought administrative reforms. Palestine, referred to as Philistin in Ottoman records, was initially attached to the Ayelet province of Damascus, later reorganized into smaller sanjaks for better control. The Timur system assigned lands to Sipahis cavalrymen in exchange for military service, while taxes like the Sisi poll tax on non-Muslims and USHR agricultural tithe funded the empire. The population hovered around 200,000 to 300,000. By the mid-16th century, mostly Arab Muslims and Christians engaged in subsistence farming wheat, olives, barley, and grapes on terraced hills. Cities like Jerusalem had about 5,000 to 6,000 residents, including a small Jewish minority. Ottoman tolerance allowed religious communities autonomy under the millet system. Muslims under Sharia courts. Jews and Christians managing their own affairs. This fostered stability, though the land remained underdeveloped, with poor roads and limited trade beyond Damascus and Cairo caravan routes. Archaeological evidence from 16th century tax registers Tahrir Defteru shows economic growth initially, with villages expanding due to secure borders. However, corruption among local governors occasionally sparked minor unrest. Why this quiet integration? The Ottomans sought efficient governance over their sprawling empire, taxing diverse groups without heavy interference. Small Jewish migrations, spurred by the 1492 Spanish expulsion, added to the mix. Sultan Bazid to welcome Sephardic refugees, some settling in Palestine's holy cities. By 1525, Ottoman censuses recorded about 5,000 Jews, supported by Halukah donations from European communities. Suleiman, the Magnificent, an architectural legacy, ascending in 1520. Suleiman, the magnificent ruler of the Ottoman Golden Age, brought prosperity and stability to Palestine. From 1537 to 1541, he rebuilt Jerusalem's city walls, a 4-year project costing 50,000 ducats, employing local laborers and following the ancient contours, but reinforcing with 34 towers and 8 gates for defense against Bedouin raids. This not only secured the city, but symbolized Ottoman commitment to the holy sites, protecting Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. Suleiman also restored the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, adding intricate Islamic tiles and fountains, enhancing pilgrimage appeal. In Safed and Tiberias, he encouraged Jewish settlement by granting tax exemptions. Recognizing their economic contributions in textiles and dyeing, under his rule, Palestine's economy modestly grew. Soap factories in Nablus exported to Egypt. Cotton from Galilee fed imperial markets. Yet Suleiman's era wasn't without challenges. Bedouin tribes like the Banu Harb and the Negev disputed grazing rights with settled farmers, leading to occasional skirmishes resolved by local pashas. Ottoman chroniclers praised the Sultan's justice, noting how he personally adjudicated petitions from distant provinces. Key players emerged. Local Arab leaders like the Ridwan family in Gaza managed sanjaks as hereditary governors, blending Ottoman loyalty with autonomy. Their mansions and cities reflected a fusion of Turkish and Arab architecture. Jewish communities and mystical revival. Jewish life flourished modestly, with communities in the 4 holy cities, Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberias, and Safed. By 1800, Jews numbered around 5,000 to 7,000, a slight growth from 1517's estimates. Safed became a mystical hub in the 16th century, attracting scholars fleeing European persecution. Rabbi Joseph Caro, arriving in 1535, authored the Shulchan Aruch, a cornerstone of Jewish law, while Moses Cordovero systematized Kabbalah. The pinnacle was Isaac Luria, the Ari, who settled in Safed in 1570 from Egypt. His Lurianic Kabbalah introduced concepts like Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, and divine sparks, influencing global Judaism. Supported by philanthropists like Dona Gracia Mendes, Portuguese converso who rebuilt Tiberias in the 1550s. Jews engaged in wool dyeing and weaving, contributing to the economy. No major pogroms marred this period until the 19th century, though isolated incidents occurred like the 1660 Safe riots amid economic decline. Diaspora funds via Constantinople sustained yeshivot, preserving spiritual ties. Perspectives varied. Jewish chroniclers, like Gedaliah ibn Yahya, described Safed as a city of sages, while Ottoman records noted their protected dhimmi status, paying jizya but enjoying religious freedom. Arab society, economy, and Bedouin dynamics. Arabs formed the majority, Muslims 80 to 90%. Christians 10 to 15%, shaping Palestine's culture and economy. Villages centered on clans Hamulus, cultivating terrace lands under the Miri system, where the state owned soil but granted usage rights. Key crops included sesame, figs, and dates. Nablus specialized in olive oil soap, exporting 5,000 tons annually by the 18th century. Merchants in Jaffa and Acre traded with Europe, but isolation limited growth. Population dipped in the 17th century due to plagues and famines, recovering to 250,000 by 1800 per Ottoman tax records. Bedouins, nomadic tribes like the Tamiray, posed challengers, raiding caravans and disputing water sources with fellahin peasants. In the 18th century, figures like Daher al-Omar, a Bedouin origin leader, controlled Galilee from Acre, building fortifications and promoting cotton exports before his 1775 defeat by Ottoman forces. These disputes foreshadowed tensions, but Ottoman arbitration often prevailed. Arab society blended Sufi orders like the Qadiriya in Jerusalem with folk traditions, festivals, poetry, and hospitality. Challenges, perspectives, and historical insights. Challenges included the 1831 to 1840 Egyptian occupation by Muhammad Ali, sparking the 1834 peasants' revolts against conscription and taxes rebels. Briefly captured Jerusalem before Ottoman restoration. Eastern perspectives. Traveler, Evliya Çelebi, 1648 to 1650, described a vibrant, multi-ethnic land with gardens of paradise in Galilee. Western views, like Mark Twain's 1867 account, portrayed desolation, ignoring underlying vitality. Archaeology confirms. 16th century registers show urban growth. Sites like Ramla reveal Ottoman baths and markets. Genetic studies link modern Palestinians to ancient Canaanites, underscoring continuity. From 1517 to 1800, Ottoman Palestine was a quiet prelude stable under sultans, diverse in communities yet underdeveloped in tents. Arabs sustained the land's rhythms, Jews nurtured spiritual flames, and Bedouins roamed its edges. This era of relative peace laid subtle foundations for the conflicts ahead, testament to endurance in a wholly contested space.
That's the story of how empires layered Palestine with new faiths and peoples, while a scattered nation held on to its ancient dream. As an outsider, I'm struck by this land's pull across centuries. What does it mean to claim a home shaped by so many? Join me in my next video for Chapter 3 as we hit the different era and learn on the rise of Zionism. Like and subscribe, share your thoughts and comment down below, and let's keep history alive with the Deep Chapter.